Welcome to another edition of Mini Talks, and you guessed it, it's Monday, another reason for you to smile. Today I'll be talking about UFC 264, that was just a couple of days ago. Talking about Connor McGregor specifically. But let's get into a few of the fights that happened before. I specifically was watching the undercards and watching the Ryan Hall fighters, excited to see him fight. Not a whole lot of opportunities to see his matches in the UFC since he doesn't get a match that often. So I was happy to see him get in there. And one of the things I noticed about the fight, if you follow grappling or anything, he's going for his Imanari rolls. He's going for the legs, trying to get the fight to the ground. But little did I know that he had suffered a broken hand. I think he said it was on his first punch. I think it was his left hand, if I'm not mistaken. So he broke it off the first punch. So that may explain why he was so adamant about going to the ground instead of standing. Because I know firsthand experience, if you get a broken hand in a fight, it kind of changes your, for one, it changes your life. The other reason, it changes your mindset that's in the moment. And you're trying to figure out ways how to work around that. So, hope the guy heals up and, we get to see him fight again. Let's get into, I'm not going to talk about details of the Poirier-McGregor fight. Just a quick note, though. A lot of people are talking about O'Malley, 80% striking. Yeah, it was right under 80%. It was like 78% or something like that. Poirier, 97% in his striking, and it was all headshots. I didn't count the number of shots that he threw. I just saw the percentages. McGregor's percentages was 48% landed to the head, 22% landed to the body, 30% at the legs. And when you look at those stats, you look at the percentages, but you look at the shots that McGregor chose, and you look at the diverse shots of the legs, the body, the head. He also grappled in that fight. Poirier, you can argue that he was one-dimensional. The guy's a great boxer. He chose the angles, and he knew his strategy, which is very different from the first fight. In the first fight, you look at him, and he just looks like he's, fighting the next individual that he just thinks he can pick him apart. I'm not going to say no game plan, but very little game plan. That's let's say the game plan then was very different from the one he had today. He's a much smarter fighter, much more experienced. Much more comfortable in the fight. But everybody's talking about McGregor after the fight. Not really talking about Poirier's win. McGregor suffered an injury, suffered the broken leg in the fight. People were down on him because he talked about grappling, and he went for a submission with the grappling, and the casual fans that just kind of tuned in don't really know the history of Connor McGregor. Look, I've seen Conor win by rear naked choke. He's fought on the ground. If you watch him and Max Holloway fight, you know that McGregor scored 4 takedowns in that fight. And it's a 3-round fight that went the distance, and McGregor won by decision. It was heavy grappling in the last 2 rounds of that fight. But you really have to look at, the history of McGregor. And just on my perspective and how I was introduced to Conor, he was one of these guys that came into the UFC with a lot of hype behind him. He was, people were saying he was already a star before I considered him a star, which being a star and a great fighter, it's probably 2 different things. He has the talk. He was said to walk the walk. But when you do so much talk, and maybe you predict your fights, your finishes in 2 or 3 fights, but does that make you a great fighter? No, because every fighter says they're going to go out there and knock somebody out. So if you say that every fight, your percentages should be fairly decent. The difference is predicting when you're going to finish them, how you're going to finish them, and those things. And that's something that he talked and he done. Now, one of the biggest talents that I see McGregor that he has is his ability to strike, his accuracy, just the way he controls distance, and he's able to get it done in the fights. And the fights that he's finished is by knockout. The accuracy is, it's incredible, to watch him. But you look back at his career. Let's see, got to get my notes here. You look back at his career, and his first fight in the UFC was with Marcus Brimage, which was a win. He got the TKO knockout. His second fight was with Max Holloway. That fight went the distance. It was by decision. He outstruck Holloway. It was a good fight. If you hadn't watched a fight, go back and watch it. But people talk. I compare this fight to the Poirier fight. One of the Poirier fights. But Conor, they say he doesn't shoot for takedowns. He only goes for takedowns or clinches up when he's in trouble. Well, not the case in the Holloway fight. He done very well in the first round. At the end of the first round, he shot in for a takedown. He clinched with Holloway, and following 2 rounds, he went to the ground with him. Holloway actually kind of pulled guard on him one time. I don't know if they counted that as a takedown. But McGregor, he fights on the ground. Some of his fights before the UFC, he went to the ground. So it's something that he does. He may not talk about it or brag about it because that's not his forte. I think his striking clearly outshines his grappling. But Marcus Brimage, good intro fight. Max Holloway, he's not the fighter then that he was now, but definitely was a nice win for McGregor, not a finish. Now, if we get into his next fight was with Diego Brandao. He won that fight. It was a knockout there. He went on to fight Dustin Poirier for the first time after that. We know what happens there. That was in 2014. Significantly a long time ago. McGregor knocks him out. His next fight, they give him with Dennis Seaver. I watched the fight. It was a knockout. And one thing that's interesting there, I said at the time that was a gimme fight to get him into the title picture. UFC was strongly behind him as promoting him and building him up as, for his career. He took advantage of it. Said a lot of different things. Went on after that to beat Chad Mendes by knockout. Chad Mendes, last minute decision. Chad Mendes, his history. He's a reputable fighter. He wasn't prepared. He didn't have the gas. He gassed out in the first round. It got him finished. We see the momentum build up to the Jose Aldo fight. McGregor starches him. In the fight, Joe Rogan says he finished him on his first punch. Not the case. Conor actually threw 2 punches in that fight. He threw 2 left hands. He threw a straight left, and then he threw the hook off the left hand and knocked him to the canvas, giving him the win. Gave him the interim belt. McGregor goes on to fight Nate Diaz after that. He loses that fight. I had McGregor picked to lose. By this time, McGregor's on my radar for not, to watch, but he's not on my radar as far as like being one of the greatest of all times. Because his first, I'm going to say for some of his first fights, I only consider him fighting 2 legitimate opponents for his talent of a fighter. Some of those guys just weren't as talented as he was. They were given shots. Consider Max and Dustin, the caliber of fighters that he should have been facing. I didn't think he kind of deserved the Jose Aldo fight, but nonetheless, he got it. And the way he beat him was by his talk and making him mad, not so much as skill set in the ring. But, you can't deny his accuracy and his striking capabilities. Mendes just wasn't the right matchup for him. Mendes didn't stick to the blueprint of how to beat him. It's just, me from the outside looking in. But we have the 2 Nate Diaz fights back to back. Conor redeems himself in the second match, comes out there and beats Diaz. It's a decision fight, but the fight, it went the distance. It's a 5-round fight. People sketchy on McGregor's his cardio. He only went the distance once, and that was with Max Holloway. That was a 3-round fight. his next fight coming up. Of course, I had Diaz to beat him the first time. I had Diaz to beat him a second time. I don't know what happened to Diaz in the second fight. I think he should have won the second fight. But going on, is the first fight I picked Conor to win, and that was with Eddie Alvarez. Conor knocked Eddie out. I've seen Alvarez fight before. He takes a lot of punches from his opponents, which I knew would put him in jeopardy with Conor, especially with his accuracy and his power. What year was that? I think it was that was in 2016. And McGregor had the 2-year layoff before he came back and fought Khabib. 2 years is a long time for the momentum that he had to lay off to come back and fight a caliber fighter like Khabib. Great on the ground. He's got hands. He's not afraid to strike with people, but he showed that in the Conor fight. He punished Conor in that fight and finished him early by the submission. Everybody saw the fight. Don't think Conor doesn't fight as good as Khabib on the ground. Let's put it like that. And from 2018 to 2020, he lays out and comes back and fights Donald Cerrone. Finishes Donald Cerrone. Shoulder strikes, set it up the knockout. It was a good fight. He caught Cerrone off guard and, took advantage of the situation. It's one of the things I teach in my classes. Element of surprise will get you. I mean, you can know a fighter's great, but if you can surprise them in some way and catch them slipping in some type of way, anybody can beat anybody. I mean, it's a puncher's chance when you're on the feet. You just need that one shot sometimes. Of course, after that, he goes on to fight Dustin Poirier back-to-back. Loses both of those fights. So if you see his fight record in the UFC, I mean, I'm not counting numbers of wins. I'm looking at his opponents and who he's fought. If you followed Dustin Poirier, you should know his history. He's one of the fighters that I've waited to come through for a long time because he's one of these guys that are durable striker. A lot of boxing. He's got the wrestling. He's good in both areas. He has a talent, not just on the feet. He has some talent on the ground. I know we've seen him get submitted, but I've seen him, have some success on the ground with other guys in the grappling department. So he's no lackluster fighter. But you look at McGregor's opponent, who's there that just has that's in the talk of being one of the greatest of all times. You could argue that for Jose Aldo. We've seen what happened to him after the fight. But when I look at there on that list, there's only you can call Max because he's held a belt. You can put Dustin in there in the running. The only one that really stands out, is Khabib. He's a dominant fighter out of that whole list. And this is where I say, like, casual fans, you hear the talk of all the wins, the knockouts, but you don't know the caliber of the opponent. And to say somebody's the next greatest, I always look at who they beat, how they beat them, what styles were the matchups. To me, at the time when I heard of him, he just wasn't in the running. The only time I really considered him a threat was after the Jose fight. And after that, he kind of went downhill a bit. But the things I want to pick out is he always had the talent, of the knockout in the hands, the accuracy. Did he stay at one level the whole time and everybody else just surpassed his level? Or is it something behind the scenes that he's doing that brought of his demise of all of his losses here lately? Some people would argue the fact of his extracurricular activities out of the ring. It's a big distraction. We've seen other fighters do that in the past. We've seen Tyson as that example. But, it's something to think about. I try not to make this episode too long. I get to talk about MMA, and I can talk forever. But think about those opponents, and do you consider him one of the greatest of all times based on the opponents, based on what he done, based on what he's doing now? He's one of these guys that I think were kind of ahead of his time. He strung together a few good wins, built up a name, and kind of fell off after that. He didn't work to advance, to diversify his game. Can he come back from this? I think he has the potential. I think he's young enough. Probably has some talent enough, but like anybody else, there's some things probably going on behind the scenes. He's not exactly focused on that thing. It's a lot of personal problems that's been going on, and you can see it on YouTube. I don't have to get into it here, but that's pretty much my experience with him moving along. It's just they build these guys up, and from the public, it looks great. You hear the trash talk, and public's perspective is a great fighter, but when you sit down and look at the stats, to me, it's kind of a different story. And when you can take less than a handful of guys out of this roster and consider them, some of the powerhouses, the most notable fighters in the UFC, the fighters that's held belts and done a lot of damage and broke records themselves. But I'm going to get out of here. I originally had another episode planned for this week, but I thought I'd get into the McGregor story here today. But thanks for tuning in. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, and all that stuff. And thanks for coming out and supporting the podcast. And I'll talk to you guys in the next one.